Let me ask you guys a question, and I think Ken's going to regret saying he is thankful for me. Is it okay to kick a baby? No. Okay. If you go to the store and pay in cash for a $10 item with a $20 bill, and the cashier accidentally gives you $15 back, is it morally good to say, oh, you gave me too much money, here's $5 back, and not steal? Is that morally good? Why was your first answer no and your first answer yes? But
I think it's because God created us with morals inside of us that is God-given, and we just know it's not right to kick a baby.
so one said circumstances dictate that it's reprehensible to kick a baby and it's morally good to not steal. Another said that it's God-given, the morals on all of us. But notice in unison, all of you said it's morally bad to kick a baby. And all of you in unison said it's morally good not to steal. Why is there universality in your answer? We all agree it's morally bad to kick a baby. There's different ages, different genders. People were born in different states. And yet, with this diverse background, you all agree it's morally wrong to kick a baby. Why?
Because God has given to humanity through his word what is moral and what's not.
Because God has given through humanity what's good and what's not.
Even if I hadn't ever heard of God or the Bible, the baby can't kick back to do equal damage to me, so it's not fair. Picking on someone who can't fight back.
Oh, it's not fair that the baby can't fight back. So now we're appealing to fairness, even if we've never heard of God. That's what Nikki said. Notice when we start to talk about morals, and here's the thing that I want everybody to understand. Whether you believe in God or not, there's morals. C.S. Lewis once said, you cannot say that a line is crooked unless you know what a straight line looks like. Right? So we can't call something evil unless we know what good looks like. Jesus, notice this quote up here, no one is good but God alone. How do we know what evil is unless we know what good is? Even for a non-believer, just because they don't believe God exists, they still know what good is.
But you have, throughout history, individuals do some just horrible things without any remorse at all.
But throughout history, you have people that do evil things. Okay, let's talk about one of them. Let's talk about Hitler. We're going to talk about him. But first, let's talk about Dostoevsky. He was a Russian literist. I can't pronounce his name because he's Russian. But basically, he said, without objective morality, everything is permissible, such as eating Kit Kats like a crazy person. Now think about this. Put yourself in the mindset that there is no God. God does not exist. It's hard for the Christian to imagine this. So that means when we die, what? Nothing. We cease to exist. All of our memories cease. All the pain that we've ever experienced ceases. All the joy, whatever that means, because there is no God to define joy, that ceases. All of our accomplishments we will never remember. All of our evil deeds we will never remember. There is no morals if God doesn't exist. So everything is permissible. I can kick a baby. Why shouldn't I? Because my mom told me not to? Who's she? I'm going to eventually die and nothing. And that was his point. Without God, everything's permissible. But yet, my first question to you, is it morally allowed for me to kick a baby? In unison, you all said no. It didn't matter that you're Christians. There's no verse in the Bible that says, don't kick the baby. That's not in the Bible. Trust me, I've read the Bible. It's not there. So that's not a commandment from God. You didn't learn that in church. Pastor Ken, did you ever preach once, don't kick the baby?
But because we are Christians and we have seen the revelation of God and who He is, His personality, and His traits, we know that that extends to all humanity, whereas a group of non-Christians may not answer that because they don't have that experience of God.
Well,
I think it's inborn in us that we just know not to, that's wrong.
so one said that because we're Christians, we know not to kick the baby. Another said it's just inborn on us because we're humans. And I think that you would find that most non-believers would agree that we shouldn't kick babies. I think that that's, as Paul wrote to Romans, that, the moral law is put on our heart, right? Like everybody's aware of this moral law, which, by the way, a moral law would require a moral lawgiver, just saying. And we'll talk about this moral lawgiver and which one it is. But as I was pointing out, that, if God doesn't exist, everything's permissible. We could do, Ted Bundy pointed this out, if you guys have heard of him. He said the reason that he was so horrible is he didn't believe in God, and he's going to do what he wants. And if he got caught and put in jail, what does it matter? He's going to die and forget that he was in jail. That was his logic. Nietzsche tried to live this logic and ended up killing himself because the logic's just nonsense and it drove him crazy. You cannot make sense of this type of logic. And that was actually Dostoevsky's point in the Brothers Komofsky, I think is how you say it. But he was pointing out that we don't do everything permissible because, as you said, it's inborn on us that there are morals. When I'm given too much change back, yeah, I have a sinful nature. Maybe I'm a little short of money that week and I might steal it. People steal. That's sin. We have an inbred sin nature. We see a gradient of sin, lesser sins and more severe sins. But at no point am I going to play soccer with a baby. There's no possible reason that would ever get me to do that. That's just a breaking a moral too far. And your average human would never do that. That's the point of morals. Whether you're a believer, a non-believer, or a believer of a different religion, we all have this moral, and it doesn't matter your gender, your ethnicity, your religion, your age. We all can agree on basic certain morals, and that points to a moral lawgiver. And,
There has been cases throughout history where because of different ethnicities or social status or whatever, people kick babies.
yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, and people, and he pointed out that people do break morals, right? We do have murderers and bank robbers and all kinds of horrendous people out there where people do break the moral law. We do live in a real world, and what do we call that? We call that evil. It's not. I'm not saying that when I say morals exist. Again, remember, C.S. Lewis said we can call a line crooked because we know what a straight line is. These people that do evil, they know that they're doing evil. They're not doing bad things and calling it good. They may try to convince the world it's good, but everybody still knows it's evil. They still know it's a crooked line. Stalin, when he killed 100 million people, knew that it was evil. He never tried to say that, hey, this is, he had propaganda that he wanted people on his side. Sure, but they justified it. You do not have to justify good. When it comes to morals, yes, Ron? Right. Well, and Ron pointed out that we can see these morals in the animal kingdom where, animals will take care of their young. Even different species can recognize a youngling and take care of it from predators, right? Even intrinsic basic morals that animals can recognize. People have seen grown dogs take care of a baby kitten that's defenseless out on the streets. Now, if it's a full-grown cat, would the same dog probably leave it be? Probably. And that's their line of moral reasoning. And again, when we're talking good and evil, I'm not saying that everybody's good. Everybody has a choice. Some will choose to do good, and sometimes people will choose to do evil. I'm not saying that we don't have that choice, and I'm not saying that people haven't chosen to be evil. Today's talk is on morals and what do they mean. And because morals exist, it's not something that I can hold in my hand. I can't hold a moral in my hand. It's not physical. And if it's not physical, if it's not made of matter, it has to point to something immaterial. And like I said, because the moral law exists, if we get into a debate and we start arguing, you're arguing your point and I'm arguing my point, the reason we argue is we assume that there's an objective answer above both of us that we're pointing to. It's not physical and it's not material. We're hoping to get to that higher answer above us. And that's kind of the same thing with morals. We're hoping to appeal to this moral lawgiver. Now the question becomes, what is the moral lawgiver? And what we're going to talk about is what the non-believers say is the moral lawgiver. They're going to apply to society. The government gives us our rules. And so let's go back and look at one of these evil people. I think we all pretty much generally agree that Hitler was a very, very bad person. Very bad. So now here's the thing. If society dictates morals, the government dictates morals, if the society and the government is the moral lawgiver, Hitler's a good guy. That's a crazy statement. But think about this. Nazi Germany, their laws, he didn't break any. He's a good guy if society is the moral lawgiver. But yet the whole world, all the nations, came together in the Nuremberg trials and said, no, killing 6 million people just because of their ethnicity is morally wrong. Again, applying to a higher moral authority that's not from society, right? So when people and non-believers will typically try to say no, morals come from our society, well, societies change, but yet it's always been morally wrong to kill an innocent person. Now notice, I'm not saying that killing is wrong. We even read that in the Bible. But I'm saying killing an innocent person is morally wrong, right? Because there's times for self-defense and times in war, and we can come up with 1,000 reasons that killing can be justified. But killing an innocent person is always morally wrong. And that's not what Hitler did. And that's why there was the Nuremberg trials, because he was morally wrong. And the whole world saw that and condemned him. Even though his society was trying to justify, say, no, these are our country's rules. We can do this. We're morally right. That didn't fly. And even in history, we see that he wasn't correct. So with that little introduction to morals, of where do morals come from, they can't come from society because that's too subjective and too changing. Whoever the government is in charge can, the next leader, Hitler could have said kicking babies is morally good. And then all the Nazis would have kicked babies. But yet, today, we already saw that everybody agrees kicking babies is morally wrong. Why? Because there's a higher moral lawgiver. So what does the moral law point to? Well, for us, God. So, as we continue into our apologetics, I'm going to introduce to you our second law of logic when we work with those who don't believe. It's called the law of the excluded middle. It's pretty simple. Now, there are some exceptions to this, but for the most part, if something is true or false, it can't be in between. Remember last week we said the law of non-contradiction. It can't be both true and false. Well, what's in the middle of true and false? Nothing. There is no gradient. What's in the middle of male and female? Nothing. That's the law of the excluded middle. There's nothing in the middle of two absolutes. So when we say there's something true or false, there's nothing in the middle. So when people try to argue for this, it defies logic. So that's the law of the excluded middle. Now, the appeal to authority. I love Ronald Reagan. He said the scariest thing here is I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. Well, he was being a smart aleck. But there's also the appeal to authority, and people love to use this. And remember, last week we talked about the straw man fallacy, where somebody's going to build up a fake narrative so that they can attack that rather than the truth, because sometimes the truth is too hard to attack. Well, sometimes, rather than trying to explain the truth, because remember, the truth is always true because it's the truth. The sky is blue simply because it's blue, not because I said so. Now, let me give you an example of the appeal to authority. I'm an airplane captain. I was in real life. I flew airplanes for years and years. An appeal to authority is for me to say, the sky's blue, and I'm telling you so because I'm an airplane captain. I know weather. See how I'm appealing to my authority? Well, sure, it turns out that the sky is blue, but the sky isn't blue because I'm a pilot. That actually makes no sense when you think about it. The sky's blue because I'm a pilot? That's insane. But that's the appeal to authority, right? Now, there are experts in the field. As a pilot, I can tell you why the sky is blue. I can get into like the refraction of light and all this physical process. That's part of my authority because I studied the subject, but the sky isn't blue because I'm a pilot. Many times in conversations, people want to convince you of the truth by appealing to their authority so that you don't question them. It's not true because of their authority. It's true either because it's true or it's false, and it can't be in between. So I want you to keep this lesson, this thought going, plus our law of non-contradiction and our straw man fallacies going as we come into our next lesson. So let's do a little review. What's the best question to ask when we're engaging people that are critical of Christianity? When they make a claim, Jesus was just a myth. How would you respond to me if I said that? You, sir, with the stone face. You didn't learn anything last week.
What do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that? Great. It's like you have some notes in front of you.
I can read.
What do you mean by that? That's a perfect question, and you can zoom in on words. What do you mean by myth, right? But what do you mean by that? So that's what we learned last week, is to get in the driver's seat by clarifying what do you mean by that. And when we ask this question, it gets us back into the driver's seats, as you see in the notes, but our 39 to 90 YouTube viewers may not see this. And one of the examples I gave here is science has proved there's no God. That's a strong claim because you don't want to go against science. But what do you mean by science? Do you mean like physical science, theoretical science? We want to zoom in on this. And there's a reason that we want to zoom in. So, why do we ask this question? Besides wanting to get back in the driver's seat, why do we ask, what do you mean by this? Yeah, it helps us understand their position, right? Because 1 Peter 3:15, with gentleness and respect, we're not just out to prove them wrong, we're actually out to understand them. That's one of the hallmarks of a good apologist, is to seek understanding. Okay? It also helps us to really understand what they mean, but let's face it, as we talk morals, not everybody's on the up and up. Some people are actually out there to try to trap you. Sometimes, if they use the word like, science has disproved God, and you're like, well, actually, we've got this kind of science that proves, if we go down the science of philosophy, we can use the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and start giving all the scientific proof for God. And then they go, well, I didn't mean that kind of argument. So you wasted all this time giving evidence that they won't accept. because they won't accept any kind of evidence you have. They want to trap us. So not everybody's always on the up and up. So sometimes we want to ask this question to get them to narrow down. Well, this is the exact type of science I'm going to accept, or, well, there's nothing you could say that I'll accept. Well, okay, it was nice talking to you. Bye. Sometimes we just say that. All right. What's next after we learn these questions? Anybody ever play Uno? It's the reverse card. What's next? We want to reverse the burden of proof. For some reason, the outsiders have this thought that if they make the claim, it's our job to prove that their claim's wrong. There's no evidence for God. Well, I'm the apologist. I'm going to prove why you're wrong. That's not how proof works. You made the claim. You prove it. Why is it on me? I can disprove it. Yeah, that's actually why I've got almost 2 degrees, about ready to graduate with my second and going for my PhD. I can definitely disprove it, but I didn't make the claim. And that's one of the things I'm going to be very careful with when I'm talking to some people, is to make sure that I don't give a claim until I'm ready to defend what I'm going to say. And what I say, I'm always ready to defend. That's what a good apologist does. When I say Jesus rose from the grave, prove it. Okay. And if you show up this Sunday, this is my little segue, I'm going to prove it. Like that, like how I pitch for my own sermons. But when they make a claim, don't let them out of proving it. Reverse it. And how do we reverse that? Well, first off, there's this thing called the skunk in the jury box, all right? And that means, like, if you throw the skunk in the jury box and the judge goes, hey, get that skunk out of here, the smell's going to linger, right? So we don't want them to say something in a group of people and that smell to linger, even if it's a bad claim, right? They might be like, there's no scientific evidence for God, and then we're trying to defend it, and they're like, I don't accept that evidence. I don't accept that evidence, right? Because that smell's going to linger. And everybody's going to be like, is there no evidence for God? We don't want the skunk in the jury box. So the second they make a claim, well, what do you mean by science? We take the driver's seat. Notice, I haven't really had to have any training so far as like, science. What do you mean by science? Oh, well, can you prove your position? That's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to reverse back. Well, you're making a claim that there's no science for the evidence of God. Prove it. Can you prove that there's no science? Now, of course, that's a big task to prove that there's, they'll be like, well, you can't prove a negative, which is actually false, because you can. You just have to prove it's a contradiction. Back to the first law, the law of non-contradictions. So, anyhow, when it comes to the burden of claims, whoever makes the claim has the burden of proving their claim. And that's why when somebody makes a claim, we don't want it to go unchallenged, because we now have that skunk in the jury box. So just remember, it's not always our job as apologists to disprove everything they say. Sometimes it is, and that's where we use the Holy Spirit as Christians in discernment. Well, sometimes there's a group of people here, and this lie is just bad enough, I need to interject and put some truth out there. And I'll do that. Other times, I'm just going to question them. What do you mean by that? And then we're going to get to the simple question of how do we reverse the burden of proof? Because is there a simple question to reverse the burden of proof? Yeah, there is. How did you come to that conclusion? Right? So what do you mean by that? What do you mean by science? And, well, how did you come to the conclusion that there is no science to prove God? Did you look at all the science? Because there's a lot. That would be one of my first questions. Now, it sounds a little arrogant, and I'm just playing around with you guys, but did you look at all the science? Well, no. Is there any science that you wouldn't accept? So I can start asking questions. How did you come to this conclusion? Right? Did they? So that's our question. And if you notice, we're right back in the driver's seat here. So they can't say, well, I can't prove a negative. Well, did you look at how did you come to the conclusion? You tell me. How did you come to this conclusion? All right. Now, with that, to have a little bit of fun with you guys, It's your turn with everything that we learned, and we should have about 5 minutes left because I set my timer. Number 2, and if you notice in the background, kind of faded out, is our friendly Let Me Go to Hell spiritual atheist. And she says, I get just read the Bible. I have a master's degree in theology. I studied medieval exegesis in Jesus. And they say that as if there is only one interpretation or message of the Bible, when there's not one single doctrine, not one, that is consistent throughout the Bible. This is why you get to use the Bible to do just about anything. The Bible solves nothing. It's just a complex, long-form conversation where you can glean wisdom. But there is not anything there that you can use as a foundation to build a life. My apologist, your turn. Use all the skills that we've learned up to now. How would you deal with our friend here?
Well, she does say it's just a long-form conversation where you can glean wisdom. But then says, but there is not anything there that you can use as a foundation to build your life on. If you glean wisdom from it, doesn't that help build a foundation for you? And why would you claim the book that you says is irrelevant? Why would you say you glean wisdom from it?
So Pastor Ken points out that she says there's a long-form conversation where you can glean wisdom, but at the same time, not anything there that you can use as a foundation to build a life on. Clearly, that's a contradiction, violating our first law that we learned. Okay.
I want to ask her too, where did you get your master's degree in theology?
Where did you get your master's? Where did you get your master's degree in theology? And this brings us back to what was our fallacy today? Appeal to authority. Here's the thing about appeals to authority. She very well may have a master's degree in theology. Which theology? Christian, Mormon, Islam, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Unitarianism. There's all kinds of theology. By the way, as Ken said, which seminary? Oh, what was your GPA to graduate? Did you actually learn anything in this? Because you can get C's and still graduate. You can graduate bottom of your class. Doesn't mean you learned anything to get that degree. So we can see why the appeal to authority, why I put it in today, it's not a very good appeal because she's appealing to her own authority, but yet we don't really see much. And yeah, so that's the area I'd probably highlight is, I'd be curious about her claiming I'm a theologian, but yet she doesn't see one single doctrine in the Bible. That's a little weird to me. All right. Say again, Pete. Pete wants to know, have you ever read all of it?
You know, a lot of people so far, I can say a lot, but sometimes people do use their authority, refer to their authority to prove a point, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're right, but
That.
just like she did there.
Yep.
She has a master's degree.
Well, I have a master's degree in theology, and I disagree with her.
Well, I will have a master's degree in theology in December, and I disagree with her.
You're not there yet. I am.
Ken says I'm not there yet. He is, so I can't appeal to my own authority yet. Okay, what else would we want to ask her?
What about the 3 billion people that use the Bible to build a foundation?
Okay, what about the 3 billion people that use and what about the 3 billion people that use the Bible to build a foundation for their life? Okay.
Got to be something there. That many people recognize it.
Yeah, there's got to be something there if that many people recognize it. Where are you hurting? What's going on in your life?
What do you mean by medieval exegesis?
What do you mean by medieval exegesis in Jesus? That's actually a really good thing, is a good point, because medieval exegesis in Jesus. Well, currently, And I know that we don't have her full video up, but at one point she's like, why are we listening to old first century Palestinian stuff? I want to talk about modern stuff. Now she's talking about how she studied stuff in the Middle Ages. Well, why aren't we using modern exegesis techniques? I mean, so again, more contradictions. And when we see these contradictions, generally that tells us that there's probably not pointing to the truth. There could be some truth there, because remember, any fallacy, it could coincide with truth, but not always, right? So we just see that this is, from our laws of logic and our fallacies, it's just riddled with contradictions to logic and fallacies. But with our questions, we can just go through, what do you mean by medieval exegesis? What do you mean by there's not one single doctrine? How did you come to the conclusion that there's not one single doctrine? This is a Bible that you can do just about anything with. How did you come to that conclusion? Because I'm pretty sure I've read the Bible, I'm not allowed to murder. How did you come to that conclusion? Thou shalt not murder, Exodus 20. It's got a lot more rules in there, but it's pretty clear, right? So she's saying, I can do anything from the Bible. How did you come to that conclusion? So again, we've got two questions now. What do you mean by that? And how did you come to this conclusion? Where we're putting them in the driver's seat and we're not having to do a whole lot of work, right? We want them, the whole goal of these questions is to get them to hopefully self-reflect and for them to see that they're not being logical and that there's fallacies involved. Okay? We want the, yeah.
You're making them think through their logic.
Yes.
You're making them think through their logic. That's our goal. Because if I say, sir, you are wrong, he's going to be defensive, he's not going to like me, he's not going to listen to me. But when I ask him questions, he starts to go, oh man, this guy's got some points. He might start to come around. Good question. What do you use to build your foundation on? Because as we talked about earlier, societies change. What if you're using society and you lived in Nazi Germany? Oh, I shudder at the thought. Okay, well, it is 6:35. Is there any more questions, or else we'll go into our prayer time, because I love to pray. Ask her if it's okay to kick a baby. I really hope she says no. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to turn the microphone off. And we did put the chairs in a